thank you all for attending today, this program. I'm really excited to be here representing the Author Series Committee, and I'm especially excited about today's guest. Dr. Robin R. Means Coleman is Northwestern's Vice President and Associate Provost for Diversity and Inclusion. An internationally prominent and award-winning scholar, Dr. Coleman's work focuses on media studies and the cultural politics of Blackness. Dr. Coleman is the author of Horror Noire, Blacks in American Horror Films from the 1890s to Present, and African American Viewers in the Black Situation Comedy, Situating Racial Humor. She is the editor of Say It Loud, African American Audiences, Media, and Identity, and co-editor of Fight the Power, the Spike Lee Reader. She is also the author of a number of other academic and popular publications. Dr. Coleman is featured in and executive produced the critically acclaimed documentary film Horror Noire, which is based on her book. And she'll actually be here to talk about her latest book, which I have a copy of, and we have copies of for sale, which The Black Guy Dies First. So I'm going to give it over to Dr. Coleman. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. And are we okay on lighting, or should I pause?
We are fine.
We're good? Okay.
You're clear.
Hello to everyone in the room. Hello to everyone on Zoom. I'm so excited to be back. So we did this, had a conversation about horror just about a year ago, I think, Megan. Is that right? And so this is sort of a follow-up to our discussion, particularly since the two books have come out. Just a couple of quick announcements. The first is I do reference a sexual assault in my talk, and if you follow my lead, I'll cover my ears and then uncover just in case you need that protection. And the other is I do sound a little bit stuffy. So Detroit did not have the deep freeze that Chicago did. So there's a little bit of allergy. And some of you are not going, yeah, we did not have a deep freeze this year. Are we ready? Okay. Sure we're on the right side. Okay. The year was 1968. Moviegoers flocked to crowded theaters throughout the summer to see the big-budget, star-packed sensation that was Roman Polanski's Rosemary's Baby. Rosemary is a film whose lurid blend of sex, violence, religion, and social commentary would help to usher in the modern era of horror cinema. But much more quietly, two shoestring budget indie features also opened in '68. Night of the Living Dead and Spider Baby. Both would prove to be just as powerful a harbinger of the shape of horror to come. Both movies are unlikely influencers. Minuscule productions, combined budgets that were 1/10 of Rosemary Baby's $3.2 million, debuting directors, filmed in cost-effective black and white, even though we were already in the age of color. Less acknowledged is Knight's and Spider Baby's role as forerunners of the treatment of black characters in horror movies over the next 50 years. Spider Baby's fatal, dismissal of its lone black character played by the legendary Mantan Moreland, and its opening moments became a template for the proverbial Black Guy Dies First scenario, a scenario that will remain a persistent punchline for the genre. Let's take a look. Oh, 2 times.
Anybody home? Please say yes. Somebody home?
Meanwhile, Night of the Living Dead's black guy, Ben, likewise died, but he did so as a hero and the last man standing.
Boy, you're crazy. Those things are going to be at every window with door in this place. We've got to get out of here and sell it. Go down in this damn store. Get out of here. I take the girl with me. You can have something. And everything else is up here. Because if I stay up here, I'm fighting for everything up here. The radio and the food is part of what I'm fighting for. If you're going down to sell it, get. He's insane. We've got to have food down there. We've got a right. We've got a right. You're going down there with him. Yes or no? This is your last chance. Don't beat around the bush. Listen, I got a kid down there. She can't puzzle. I couldn't bring her out here. She can't puzzle anything all racket. Those things smashing through the windows.
Well, you're stupid enough to go die in that trap. That's your business. However, I am not stupid enough to follow you. It is tough for the kid. That old man is so stupid. Now, get the hell down in the cellar. You can be the boss down there. I'm boss up here.
Ben's heroism and almost survival were a rarity that signaled promise for a future in which Black characters could save the day. But save whom? And from what? When Jordan Peele's 2017 hit horror film Get Out won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay, the horror genre yet again attracted robust critical attention and scholarly engagement. Get Out joined a pantheon of horror greats, the likes of Night of the Living Dead, Rosemary's Baby, as well as Stepford Wives and The Silence of the Lambs, all of which has been described as thoughtful interrogations of our socio-political world. Here's what Peele had to say about the Stepford Wives and Rosemary's Baby, as quoted in /film. For me, those movies were both extremely inspiring because they honored the protagonist in a way that you rarely see in the genre these days. Every step into Weird Town that those movies makes, there's an equal effort to justify why the character doesn't run screaming. That's the technique I brought to Get Out. Now, remember that bit, doesn't run screaming. We'll revisit that momentarily. Something still greater happened. Peele's film put Black horror specifically at the center of these critical conversations. The genre calls attention to Blackness, Black life, culture, history, ideologies, language, aesthetics, and the like. Per film historian Thomas Cripps, a Black film has Black creators and performers that speak to Black audiences and at times incidentally to white ones. While many talk about a Black horror renaissance, Get Out is not entirely a watershed moment. In my 2023 book, Horror Noire, A History of Black American Horror from the 1890s to present, I trace Black people's 130 plus year participation in the genre. In my 2023 book, The Black Guy Dies First, co-authored with the extraordinary journalist Mark Harris, we trace the tropes, the cliches, and the themes that have defined Black people's participation in horror over the years. For example, we turn to the theme of woke horror to interrogate where Black horror is today. We write, the term woke horror emerged in early 2017 in the rush to categorize Jordan Peele's Get Out, seemingly satisfying a desperate need to make sure of its existence. The Golden Globes, after all, notoriously nominated the film in its musical or comedy category. Slang for being informed on social issues, particularly those related to the Black struggle against institutional racism, woke rose to prominence as part of the Black Lives Matter led social justice protests of the 2010s. However, haphazard, sometimes ironic use almost immediately undermined the impact of the rally cry, "Stay woke." One very real online article promised its readers it would get you woke about your personal finances. Since Mark and I made these observations, the phrase has further grown into a term of derision. Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis has even introduced the Stop Woke Act, restricting education on race, gender, sexuality, and national origin. In our book, Mark and I continue, woke horror has become similarly divisive. Some see it as forcing political narratives and what's meant to be escapist entertainment. Following Get Out, the label woke horror was slapped on any new genre of film that dared to touch upon any topic deeper than fast zombies versus slow zombies. In truth, the horror genre, especially Black horror, has long been woke. Today, we're going to explore Black horror's response to the quest for social justice. Inspired by philosopher and political scientist Candace Delma's 2018 book, A Duty to Resist, I apply her concept of uncivil disobedience. I ask the challenging and perhaps controversial question, what would it mean for Black horror and for us, its audience, to reject more respectable, civil approaches to disobedience to secure social justice? Under civil approaches in horror, I include things like exorcism as seen in Beloved, running as seen in Get Out, or control through medical treatment as seen in Blade. But what if Black horror made the case for liberation and vengeance through the annihilation of oppressors, a kind of the First Purge, but in reverse? An annihilation motivated by the destruction of anti-Blackness. What are the limits of Black activism, of our activism? Are we prepared to embrace uncivil disobedience as a method for change? Sanctuary assistance is cool, right? But what about uprisings? Fortunately, today we get to consider this in the context of that which is the imaginary. But our nation's recent tumult evidences we are well past due in considering this question in the real. To get us thinking, I contrast Jordan Peele's Get Out, a film that takes a simple disobedience approach, with Soul Vengeance, also known as Welcome Home, Brother Charles, a 1970s Black horror film directed by the late Jamaa Fanaka. Soul Vengeance is a blunt indictment on police brutality, anti-Blackness, and the carceral state. And believe me, it is as uncivil in its disobedience as one can get. But don't worry, I won't be showing any scary clips. Part 1, Get Out, run home. In the US popular imagination, the monstrous has often been synonymous with the urban, envisaged as a gritty, criminally rife hardscape due to the supposed deficiencies of the predominantly Black and brown inhabitants who reside there. As Adilu Funama explains, particularly during the Reagan era, the urban became political shorthand for all manner of social ills that people of color were held accountable for: crime, illegal drugs, poverty, and family fracture. In many instances, these deviance-based narratives amounted to victim blaming. Whites fled the urban to what journalist and political commentator Richard Benjamin calls white-topias, those defiant little communities that remain willfully less multicultural, despite the fact that the United States is transforming into a majority-minority nation. The horror genre upsets the purported rationality of white, turning the whitopia, a coveted, segregated, homogeneous enclave, into something monstrous. Horror disarms us before hitting us with the revelation that white-topias, too, can house terrifying moral violations. We saw that in Get Out, and we saw it in Them, which we'll get to shortly. Following scholar Isabel Pinedo, I would like to first ask, what does it mean when the genre violates conventions by locating violence in the city where it's actually most expected, and furthermore plays openly on prevailing cultural anxieties by marking the monster as a racial other? Enter the 1992 horror film Candyman, directed by Bernard Rose and set in the predominantly Black, high-rise, low-income housing project Cabrini Green in Chicago. In the film, Cabrini Green is a lesson in the choking effects of gentrification. It's juxtaposed against its twin high-rise turned predominantly white and spendy condominium. The film maintains the assumption that urban Black spaces are rife with monsters, violent gangs, negligent fathers, and an utterly confused Black ghost who haunts and murders Black people instead of walking a few blocks over to the condominiums to exact revenge on the descendants of the white people who lynched him a century earlier. The film assigns value to home spaces along racial lines, with Black people and their homes deemed deplorable and expendable. Candyman haunts Cabrini Green. He beheads a Black resident's dog. He kidnaps and attempts to burn a Black infant alive, but he does not dare trouble white homes. That is, until he briefly ventures into the condos to kill a visiting, completely innocent Black woman. Then he promptly leaves. Director Bernard Rose's Candyman can only be murderously monstrous to Black people. The concept of home taking center stage in Get Out functions quite civilly. It exposes white-topias and recuperates the urban in the way Candyman failed to. Get Out asserts the enduring value of Black home spaces as sites of multi-dimensional cultural belonging, love, and loyalty. It's a place to run to as one runs from racism. In telling the story of Chris, a Black photographer who finds himself in peril when he travels to a secluded countryside estate with his white girlfriend Rose to visit her liberal parents, Director Jordan Peele challenges the ludicrous post-racial American ideology. As Peele notes, part of being Black in this country, and I presume being any minority, is constantly being told that we're seeing racism where there just isn't racism. We now know that in Get Out, where racism is right, where racism is rife, is in a whitopia. Get Out begins with Andre Hayworth, away from his home in Black Brooklyn, talking to his girlfriend on his cell phone while walking through a whitopia. Feeling out of place, he complains, "They got me out here in this creepy-ass suburb. I stick out like a sore thumb." This introductory scene works to establish the Black urban, Brooklyn, as non-threatening. It's obviously not creepy-ass. Instead, Brooklyn is where the fearful phone for comfort. It is home to the kindred among whom one does not stick out like a sore thumb. Peele turns dread into violence when the driver of a white car begins following Andre. Though he attempts to flee, Andre is grabbed from behind and rendered unconscious by the masked driver, who then places his catch in the trunk of a car and drives away. The scene disturbs by constructing the well-manicured, sterile whitopia as monstrous. We should also know that Andre was not snatched at his home, not in Black Brooklyn, because, as Elijah Anderson reminds in his book, Black and White Space, quote, "White people typically avoid Black space, but Black people are required to navigate white spaces as a condition of their existence. This scene establishes that a whitopia isn't the only home in Get Out. Instead, the film expands our conception of home to Brooklyn and urban spaces more broadly. When Chris first graces the screen, he is completely at ease in his Brooklyn apartment. He's Daniel Robitaille before Robitaille becomes Candyman. Sort of. Chris is an accomplished artist completely in his element, as Candyman once was. Get Out then begins like Candyman to play with our expectations that this is yet another prized white woman black monster parable. But it isn't. In a twist that reverses long-standing myths about the dangers that black men pose to white women, Jordan Peele positions Rose's mother, Missy, as the threat to black masculinity. A skilled psychiatrist, she uses hypnosis to enter Chris's mind without his permission. Indeed, Chris is most vulnerable in his adherence to civility, to not running from Missy. Remember, Peele said his character does not run screaming. Chris's mannerliness is his peril. Infiltrating his psyche, Missy forces Chris to relive the night that his mother died, a scene that illustrates the mother-son connection and how he came to view their home in the black urban as sanctuary. During hypnosis, Chris recounts that he was at home watching TV when his mother, coming from work, was killed by a hit-and-run driver. She was coming home, he explains mournfully. He finally realized something was wrong when, as he agonizes, she wasn't home. It's Chris's innocence, denial, and comfort inside his home that leads him to continue watching television instead of stepping outside of his sanctuary to search for his mother and to confront the shattering facts of his mother's death. In Black home, Black families are generally safe, shielded from the dangers associated with simply existing while Black, as witnessed through the assault on Andre Hayworth. Chris's comfort in home makes more significant Rose's betrayal and falsely promising that they will flee the whitopia for his Brooklyn home. After the odd behavior of the Armitages and party guests, Chris demands to leave. Rose acquiesces, saying, "Yeah, let's go home. This sucks." However, Rose is a trickster working to get Chris to a place where his home will be forever inaccessible, the sunken place, or Blackness forever recessed and placed into the service of whiteness. Chris escapes his fate, fighting his way out of the whitopia. He's whisked away to safety by his Black Brooklyn friend Rod. We see now that in Get Out, running away from racism while doing everything to avoid instigating anything uncivil is the prescription. In our article, A Peaceful Place Denied, Novotny Lawrence and I argue that civil solutions in the film are introduced in obviously two ways. First, there's the film's title, Get Out. Second, through its soundtrack, specifically the Swahili song Sikiliza kwa Wahinga. When translated to English, we get the necessary strategy for liberation. Brother, listen to the ancestors. Run. We need to run far. Listen to the truth. Brother, listen to the ancestors. Run, run to save yourself. When Rod pulls up in his TSA cruiser at the end of the film, and audiences cheer, it is because Chris defeats, as Michelle Alexander calls it, the new Jim Crowism of the 21st century's prison industrial complex. He will not become 2017, that's the year of Get Out's release. He will not become the 1,100 48th victim of a police killing. We are assured that Chris will be whisked away to the safety of his Black Brooklyn home with Rod's closing line, "Consider this shit handled." I now turn to Delmas's book, A Duty to Resist, which she presented to my department at Northwestern, inviting a lively debate about uncivil disobedience in the real. Delmas asks us to think about some types of uncivil disobedience: graffiti, sanctuary assistance, whistleblowing. Perhaps all of these things are okay. But justified political riots, vigilante self-defense, property damage, violence. How comfortable do we feel assuming we, as she says, distinguish between KKK terrorism, swastika vandalism, versus Deacons of Defense and Justice anti-Jim Crow acts, or even, say, politically conscious British feminist graffiti? First warning about a brief recounting of rape. I'll cover my ears and you can watch if you don't want to hear this part. Delma turns to the story of Theo, a Black, French, 22-year-old social worker on his way home who's harassed and arrested by police. The French police hurl racial slurs while beating Theo. Then they rape him twice with their telescopic batons, causing severe internal injuries, all of which is caught on video. End of story. Civil disobedience ensues. However, by evening, things turn uncivil when the officers are defended on television by law officials, and the cause of Theo's injuries are described as an accident. Subsequently, it's the public's uncivil disobedience that's condemned, not the police violence. We know all too well what that condemnation sounds like. Let's listen to author and activist Kimberly Jones on this point and what she calls the broken social contract. I think I need help playing this one.
Allergies, spontaneity.
Oh, so timely, allergies.
Take on all three.
So when they say, why do you burn down the community? Why do you burn down your own neighborhood? It's not ours. We don't own anything. We don't own anything. There is, Trevor Noah said it so beautifully last night. There's a social contract that we all have. That if you steal or if I steal, then the person who is the authority comes in and they fix the situation. But the person who fixes the situation is killing us. So the social contract is broken. And the social contract is broken. Why the fuck do I give a shit about burning the fucking Football Hall of Fame, about burning a fucking Target? You broke the contract when you killed us in the streets and you give a fuck. You broke the contract when for 400 years we played your game and built your wealth. You broke the contract when we built our wealth again on our own, by our bootstraps in Tulsa, and you dropped bombs on us. When we built it in Rosewood, and you came in and you slaughtered us. You broke the contract, so fuck your Target. Fuck your Hall of Fame. As far as I'm concerned, they could burn this bitch to the ground. And it still wouldn't be enough. And they are lucky that what Black people are looking for is equality and not revenge.
$60. Rewind.
What I'm saying is this:
Part 2, a most uncivil disobedience, soul vengeance. In the real, filtered through media, killings by law enforcement, anti-Black, anti-Asian, anti-Islamic, anti-Latino, anti-Semitic, and anti-LGBTQ mass shootings are literally destroying us. I'm working to raise important provocative questions about the function of disobedience in securing justice. I believe that each of us will settle on a series of highly fluid partial answers, and that's okay because that's where I am as well. For example, here's the first part of my partial answer, as informed by Jamaa. Far too often, we as a society have an expectation for resistance that leads with respecting other people's interests. We have a focus on reform. All of this to avoid posing a threat to our civic friendships, to keep those who find respect and restraint as worthy happy. Re-enter the purportedly most daring of genres, horror. Can such a radical, boundary-pushing genre illustrate alternate paths to change, to disrupting anti-Blackness? In Get Out, Chris is a model of respectability. At Rose's family home, Chris does not immediately get out. Indeed, Chris bears the ominous microaggressions that escalate to full-bore racism. Ultimately, he is forced to resort to provoked violence, but only to prevent his own destruction. He even tries to save one of his captors until their deadly betrayal is clear. Respectability limits the diversity of our choices to pursue justice. As scholar Kathy Cohen explains, respectability is based on the hope that conformity will confer full citizenship status. Hence, I further flesh out my answer about when perhaps it is time to go full-on uncivil disobedience. First, when conformist behaviors are no longer serviceable. Second, when allyship has failed. And third, when equal citizenship status remains elusive. The polar opposite of Get Out is Soul Vengeance, aka Welcome Home, Brother Charles. This is Jamaa Fanaka's 1975 now cult classic film. It's a powerful treatise on racism and carcerality. Soul vengeance begins with forms of protest before ending with acts of very uncivil disobedience. It is easily the story of Francis Theo and the U.S.'s Amadou Diallo, George Floyd, Sandra Bland, Elijah McCain, Tyree Nichols, and far too many others. The film's star, Charles, a suspected drug dealer, is picked up by two white LAPD officers who drive Charles to an alley to beat him. One of the officers, Harry, is especially sadistic. Watch my ears, another reference to sexual violence. Though terrorized and beaten by Harry, Charles remains unbowed during the encounter, and his blow-for-blow resistance is heinously punished. Harry castrates Charles with a razor. Charles is then incarcerated. While in prison, Charles is consumed by thoughts of revenge, both murder and sexual violence, that are played out in disturbing dreams and visions. The depiction of Charles's mental state echoes the infamous writings of Black Panther Eldridge Cleaver in Soul on Ice. Cleaver said he sexually assaulted Black women as practice before engaging in the politically motivated insurrectionist serial assault of white women, a twisted belief in disobedience that he would later renounce and hope to atone for. Cleaver describes his own state of mind while in prison, a more sickening parallel to the sunken place, but one that describes Charles's predicament perfectly. He writes, "I, the Black eunuch, divested of my balls, walked the earth with my mind locked in cold storage." I'm covering my ears. In Soul Vengeance, after 3 years in prison with his own mind locked in cold storage, Charles returns to his Watts home only to discover recidivism looms as employers want nothing to do with him. He says, "I can't even wash a car." His growing political sensitivity, though, is not enough. Charles catches a TV news report about Harry, his attacker, being celebrated for his highly effective community policing. Charles's anger boils over and the film turns to horror tropes with a focus on Charles's mutilated penis. It has regrown, but with aberrant musculature. Charles talks his way into the homes of the police who brutalized him and the white lawyer and judge who illegally prosecuted him. Once in their homes, now this is funny. I think it's funny if you've ever seen this. Once in their homes, Charles drops his pants, mesmerizing each man's white wife with his bewitching penis. Some of these women are hiding a taboo, extramarital affairs with men. In the first act of Charles's revenge, he has sex with the women while they're entranced. While under Charles's spell, he implants a demand into their psyche. They must open the doors to their homes for him. When their husbands return home from work, the women do as ordered. Charles catches the men off guard, killing them. Okay, so this begs the question, does Missy's from Get Out and Charles's varying motivations to forcibly enter someone's psyche make a difference to us? Now, the viewer is not initially sure how the murders have been carried out. As Pinedo says, what lurks outside the frame or unclearly within it, that's what generates uncertainty about what one is seeing. Finally, during the murder of a corrupt lawyer, Charles's power is fully revealed. He is able to will his penis to grow to lengths of several feet, which he then loops around his victims' necks, strangling them. And that's what's actually in that sort of lurking outside of the scene there. Okay, in all seriousness, the scene is a complicated one, erotic, violent, a clear visual reference to lynching by hanging. Charles's murderous deeds are uncovered and he's pursued by police to a rooftop. The police bring his girlfriend Carmen to the site, asking her to talk him down to face reincarceration or likely something much worse, since indeed he has killed a number of legal authorities. In the film's dramatic final scene, Carmen defiantly yells up to Charles, "Jump." Suicide, as Brandon Manning observes, sadly and far too often becomes, quote, the ultimate solution to American racism. While Soul Vengeance's horror twists may spark incredulity, the film is possibly the most provocative response to Black rage, the fear of the black male phallus, police brutality, and yes, uncivil disobedience. This fictional tale shines a spotlight on the fact that the debates around uncivil disobedience seem to be more pressing when the poor, Black and brown folks and urban youth enter the sphere of political activism. What are the implications of thinking this through in horror and in the real? Can we ever really say that these are the means to fulfilling our political obligations under what we perceive to be unjust circumstances? Indeed, if we follow Delmas's line of thinking to its inevitable end, we must engage this conundrum. We have become far too used to what Jennifer Fuller calls dangerous fictions around race and rebellion in our media. There remains a nostalgia for the media's presentation of a Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in his church clothes and singing spirituals. This is the brand of respectable civility that has become our meme. Delma cites Lisa Tessman, who argues that it's possible that resistance to oppression can indeed be guided by rage. Delma recalls Angela Davis, who earned legal vindication of her armed defense against racist violence. Delma and Tessman note skepticism about nonviolence as a strategy in a society engaged in so much violence. Kimberly Jones, whose video we just watched, Chris from Get Out, Charles from Soul Vengeance, and Angela Davis, they are all together quite pragmatic about the means as well as the end. Finally, part 3, Candyman 2021. Black history is Black horror. That's how famed writer Tananarive Due so eloquently put it in our horror noir documentary. Black history is Black horror. Real life horror is something that we and so many other minoritized groups have yet been able to run from. Nia DaCosta is the director of the new 2021 Candyman film, whose screenplay was written by Jordan Peele. DaCosta is motivated by the intersection of Black history, lived Black horror, and the Black horror film. As you watch this short puppet show teaser for her film Candyman, and again, no scary bits, notice the reference to George Stinney, a child, executed in an electric chair by the state of South Carolina in 1944 under suspect claims of murdering 2 white girls. George could not run. Likewise, see a reminder of the 1998 lynching of James Byrd Jr. in Jasper, Texas. Byrd was dragged to his death chained to the back of a pickup truck driven by white supremacists. James could not run. Look for how true it is that Black history is Black horror. I think I'm going to need help with this one as well. I think it's going to do the same as the other. But I don't think it's showing on the screen. Actually, that's really good. I'm looking forward to the blackening.
Rated R.
So yeah, it's here, but it's not there. Yeah, I think that might work. Yes. Good job. The violence represented is simultaneously what's expected of the genre and mnemonic of the violence done to Black folk. The memory that horror deploys has been at times reduced to trauma porn, in which the depiction of Black people enduring unspeakable violence is viewed as exploitive. Films like Them, Antebellum, and even non-horror films like When They See Us have all been described as Black trauma porn. In staying true to the fear-provoking nature of the genre, memory and memorialization may actually invigorate renewed critiques of our democracy. Horror boldly centers the notion that our systems and structures aren't built for us. They are the ones that are uncivil. Here is the key point. In horror, acts of uncivil disobedience do not always undermine justice, solidarity, or democracy. Rather, following Jamaa, they, quote, jolt the public into recognizing pressing claims of oppression. So, what are the implications of what we're considering here today? In the face of white discomfort laws, horror is now one of the more compelling social syllabi. To illustrate, DaCosta's Candyman explores the enduring generational trauma of police brutality and murder. Jordan Peele's Get Out interrogates everything from cultural appropriation and fetishization to a rejection of the post-racial. Remy Weeks's His House, Misha Green's Lovecraft Country, and yes, Little Marvin's Them consider history, trauma, and memory. The horror genre is evidence of Liza Bakewell's assertion that images do things. Bakewell elaborates, far from being ineffective and inert, images are powerful tools. We use them to establish group solidarity, to give visibility to our opinions. We use them in ways that reveals much about who we are, our class, gender, culture, age, personality, temperament, mood, and morals. If images are actions, it follows that images must have an effect on us. In a flash, the hordes had breached the building. Thousands of bodies swarmed over one another, pressing to get inside like sheep squeezing into a pen. Bodies flattened while blood oozed into cracking windows and twisted door jambs. They both soon gave way. The great hall seized. The great hall seized was reduced to a throughway for insurmountable rage and bloodlust, aimed at the few trapped and cowering behind an unprotected wooden door. Their only defense? A lone black man, stick in hand, ready to take on all comers, to defend the Capitol building. Officer Eugene Goodman saved our nation. Viewing this unimaginable scenario, it leaves one questioning if fiction can ever best the terror of real life. Fiction certainly didn't give Mantan Moreland and Spider Baby or Ben and Night of the Living Dead a chance. We must remember and decry anti-Blackness through our national outrage and through our fiction. Everybody dies, but Black people do so at a higher rate in both horror and, sadly, real life. Black horror reminds us that we have power over whether that death goes down easy or hard, or if we will, channeling Samuel L. Jackson, strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to poison and destroy our people. Finally, what's being asked of you? Horror is radical transgression. It is bloody refusal. It is riotous change. Following this line of thought, consider now what defines grave injustice. What defines grave injustice? Now, ask yourself, what are the limits of a response to grave injustice? What are the limits in horror? What are the limits in real life? Is uncivil disobedience something that we can tolerate? Thank you. Okay.
Does anybody have any questions? Comments?
What films are you, we inadvertently saw a clip of the Black Man, but what other films are you looking forward to that are coming out this year? Or if they're not films or documentaries that we should tune into that will cover some of the topics that you talked about
That are coming out.
that are coming out. Because the only one I know is of
Is Black Man. There is, I appreciate the question. I'm gonna blank on it. There's so many horror fans probably listening. And it's not the black guy dies first, but it's sort of like the black girl dies first, but she doesn't. And it's sort of a take on these horror tropes and cliches, just like the blackening. So there are two that are coming out. Anybody in the room?
The angry black girl that, and her monster.
Yes.
I saw it.
Did you see it?
Yeah, a couple months ago.
So are we excited about seeing this?
Yeah, it's kind of indie, but it's good. Yeah.
Mhm.
It'll be streaming soon.
Yeah. So I would say those two, but the blackening for sure. Now looking back, there are a few that are my favorites. One of them is Attack the Block, John Boyega. So the UK is doing really, yes, right, you're co-signing. I think that they have done some really interesting things. I think Black women are having, we talk about a horror renaissance, which I sort of reject because we've been in horror for over a century, but Black women, I think, are at the forefront of the genre. Jay Dillard's Sweetheart is one of my favorites around Black women's survival, and it's got the best monster reveal ever, and it's not super scary as well. So I do think that Black women, Remy Weeks' His House is another. So I think paying attention to women is going to be really interesting. I wrote a piece about Chloe Love is Calling, which is a 40s film, and there's a character in that film, Mandy, who, in the context of the time, she's supposed to be important. The movie isn't for us. But if you watch it as a Black woman and you pay attention to Mandy and what she does in that film, that character does in the film, it is so radical and it is so revolutionary that I'm almost surprised that film got made. So I think paying attention to what women are contributing is going to be important.
You made a reference to them. I've never seen it, but I remember when it came out a few years ago, it had a lot of, it got bashed critically because a lot of the reviewers were kind of saying the same thing you were saying, that it's basically trauma porn to some extent, and that it just felt like the subject matter was just very exploitative, even though the series did have a Black showrunner who wrote two of the episodes, and had Lena Waite, who was also the producer on it. And so it makes me wonder just exactly how much control they had over the finished product. It doesn't sound like a lot. And so that's just my presumption, but because of the, so many people said, so many reviewers who had seen it, it was like, this isn't good, what is this? That kind of thing.
So I appreciate the question, and Little Marvin himself, in a number of interviews as the director, says he's in charge. He was in charge of that series. But I want to back up about whether it was good. And I think there are two ways to think about them. The first is, I absolutely will claim them as one of the most difficult horror movie series to watch. I just presented on them like a week ago, right? It was like maybe even less than 7 days. And I really struggled to be able to find even a clip to show in that presentation that just wouldn't be traumatizing. And this was an audience of horror fans. And so we spent more time probably at trying to find a 1-minute clip to illustrate my argument. And the scene that I chose is also a difficult one, and so cover your ears, it is about rape, and I won't go into deep description. But in this scene, there is the lead character who's being brutally sexually assaulted on the floor of her home while these intruders, all of these white intruders, so home is an important theme, right, in all of these movies, are playing something that they call cat in a bag with her newborn. And so they're tossing it around, it's in a pillowcase, and they're tossing her baby around until they kill it, right? And there's a way that's illustrated that's just heart-wrenching. Similarly, he uses other scenes. A couple, the woman is pregnant, where they're lynched in an absolutely horrific way. So Little Marvin says two things. The first is that these are not dissimilar to what Black folk endured really kind of throughout history and even in some cases the present. But then Little Marvin also makes another compelling argument that I've had to deal with myself, which is them as horror. And it delivers as promised for the genre. Right? Horror isn't the genre where we feel comfortable. Horror always transgresses boundaries. Horror always makes us feel horrified. The question is, was it exploitive? And then in this regard, I think context matters. Because them comes out, we were still sort of, I always am careful to say we're constantly dealing with the grips of police murder, but we were knee deep in that. So them comes out at the same time, kind of in the same period, as also Ava DuVernay's When They See Us. And I think on the whole, Black viewers were just like, all right, we've got Philando Castile's murder live streamed. We're remembering back to what happened to the Central Park, that's not even what we should be calling them, but what happened to those boys. Then we've got Little Marvin's Them, and then on the heels of that, we have like Antebellum, which is also just horrific. In that context, it's just too much Black death. It's just way too much, and people responded to that. And also questioned, is this entertainment, right? And I think that's an important question when you do have Black murder being live streamed on social media and then repeated loop after loop after loop on the nightly news. We couldn't get away from it. I think perhaps in a different context, we would have maybe regarded them as differently, but at the same time, them is reflecting on exactly what we're living through right now. Yes, go ahead.
Well, I kind of question that because as someone who grew up loving horror, come from a horror-loving family, we watch horror movies together. I kind of question that. It kind of, to me, it depends on. It's like you can deal with a subject, but you don't have to be so exploitative you don't have to be overly gory with it or overly exploitative of it to a point where it's just that difficult to watch. It's like you have the, you have that platform to make horror movies or any other kind of horror movie, it's, you really have to be conscientious, I think, of what you're putting on the screen and why you're putting it on there and your reasons for doing so. And, just for what like I said, I've never seen them, but just for what I've read about it, I was like, okay, but why, you explain why the showrunner made those choices, but I'm like, those choices really have to be made, particularly in the context of what the show was about. I just kind of disagree with it. I haven't read interviews with him about it, and I'm like, you could have made a different choice. You didn't have to put all that on the family. And why did you show them fighting back in some way, or having some kind of triumph? Why revel in the horrible things that happened to them and make it the centerpiece? That's what I had a problem with.
I don't disagree, and I would say that the sort of thing that Little Marvin leans into is that he was true to the genre. That this isn't, these aren't, his was not a social justice movie. It was not to be conflated with When They See Us. But it also comes out, Underground has some difficult scenes as well, but I think Antebellum and them together was just too much, right? And there was just too much, there is still too much going on in this country. But he will say that he was true to the genre. Horror is supposed to horrify, and that's certainly what it did.
Do you think that took away from the popularity of the potential for Kindred? Like those other things, those other
That's
programs?
a really good question.
Programs?
So Kindred is tougher. Kindred is hard because, one, you've got to get that right. There are some narratives, like if you're going to do that, you better get that right. And Kindred was tricky. And I think many argue that they didn't quite get that right. And then it wasn't renewed, right? And so it just stops. And so I don't know if that robbed Kindred as much as there was this huge expectation. And I don't disagree with that expectation. There's all these, just doing Black narratives is tough. Like with Jada, I think it's Jada Pinkett's production of Cleopatra, like there's some stuff that people are like, okay, and you can't predict it. Like, you better get this right. I think Kindred was one that it was difficult to take on. And sort of like Malcolm X, there have been a number of Kindred scripts out there circulating. And it was sort of interesting why this one versus some others and who got greenlit and who didn't. So I think it was more that than what happened with them in Antebellum. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure. I haven't had a chance to watch Kindred yet. I just know that it kind of, I was waiting for it, and then its arrival kind of was flat, and I just didn't have a chance to do it. But as a fan of someone who's read the parable stories, I know I wanted to see those on film,
Yes.
but those could be difficult for so many reasons to try to make.
But I think there's some good consultants out there. There's like, Ronaldo Anderson, John Jennings. There are people who are Tananarive Due, who are so deeply entrenched into kind of the Octavia Butler world, the Afrofuturism world, who will get, if not in the writer's room as consultants, who will get this right. I think there's still more kindred in us. I think there's another opportunity.
I have another question that's somewhat related. So you mentioned Lovecraft Country, which I really enjoyed and assumed that they would be renewed, which it wasn't, even though it went on to win a bunch of awards. Do you have any, I don't know, I guess, take on why maybe there was no follow-up?
Are you ready? Do you have one?
I have insight.
No.
But speak into the microphone so people can hear you. And so for those who are listening on Zoom, the question was about what happened with Lovecraft Country, and we have some insight.
From the bookstore. Okay, so I think it's Matt Huff did a second book, like did another book.
Right.
And I don't think he might have been interested, he might have not been interested in that story as much. And so he is coming out with a book 2. And I'm imagining that if it is as engaging, then that may carry over the story. So it wouldn't be so abrupt.
Don't walk away yet. You have to say your name and your bookstore.
Oh, I'm Allison Jones Turner from Source Booksellers here in Detroit.
Okay, any other final questions? Please.
Well, one, I mean, obviously you produced the film. Do you have like anything coming out that you're directing yourself? And if you did, what would you do? And also, did you see a difference between the way Black people, are portrayed in horror as opposed to like science fiction or comic books or Japanese animation or any like type of fantastic literature or media that you can think of?
Okay, so the first question is, I don't have anything coming out anytime soon. So I'm a horror scholar, but I also am a genreist. So I study media genres, and I am back knee-deep in Black situation comedy. So that's going to be fun. And so there's likely something to come in the near future around comedy, Black sitcoms. Is there a difference between the ways in which Black people are represented? So it's so funny because you talked about specific genres, sci-fi. So it's complicated. I want to say that sci-fi still hasn't done, sci-fi has not done well for Black folks, right? And I'm talking about mainstream sci-fi versus Black sci-fi. So like Star Wars, Star Trek, that we're like, oh, there was a kiss, there was an interracial kiss, like that, and like, that's on your stick. So sci-fi, mainstream sci-fi hasn't caught up. Everything is about whether it's, the differentiation I make in horror is whether it's Black horror or Blacks in horror. And I would say that applies to every other genre, whether it's Black sitcoms or Black people showing up in a sitcom, or who's in the writer's room. I think in the US in particular, we are lagging far behind in our treatment, the ways in which we still are writing Black folks. They are still so, as Ashley Blackwell said about Annabelle, they're still so retro. And I think that that's right. Where I think we're doing better is around some of like Issa Rae stuff, right? Or when you have Black people writing for Black audiences, I think that's where we see a better job. But mainstream sci-fi in particular. No. What are you watching or seeing that holds promise?
Well, like you just mentioned, I'm really waiting for the Black people. There's a Netflix movie coming out. They clone Tyrone.
Yeah. Oh, that's it.
Yeah.
That I'm looking forward to. Yes.
Yeah, so I'm kind of looking forward to that. There's a comic book artist, and I cannot think of his name. The minute I leave, I'm going to remember. But they're doing a new version of Blackula.
That is John Jennings, right?
Is that Rodney Barnes?
Yeah, I think that is it.
And
also
is he
does
doing the
Philadelphia and,
Is John doing the illustration though? I think John is doing the
I
illustration.
don't remember.
Yeah, I don't remember actually. But yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to that.
He's doing the Mandalorian a little bit too.
Is he?
I just purchased one with him. As
And then they're doing Blade,
Yeah, I
which
heard about
is
that.
sort of sci-fi horror. But it's stalled because of the writer's strike. So we'll see what happens with all of these things that we've been anticipating with the writer's strike.
I've been watching The Boys a lot too, but I'm kind of conflicted about that because some of the stuff is like really, really like negative and stereotypical, but in other parts of it, I think they really excel at it. So it's kind of, I got mixed feelings about that.
And then there was something else that, I said Blade, and it made me think of something else.
Was it a TV
Oh,
show?
well, it was Marvel. You know, Jonathan Majors almost had that franchise. They set him up, and that's not going to work out. I don't think he will recover that. But he, as Kang, he was set up. That was sort of the only sort of exception for sort of sci-fi that I thought might be interesting.
I haven't seen that.
He did really well in, what was it, Quantumania?
Mhm.
I sort of thought that was, he performed that well, and they were setting him up to kind of take over, I think, various parts of the franchise, but I don't know what they're going to do now.
I want to see that new Miles Morales movie too, the new Spider-Man movie.
Yeah.
All right, well, I wanted to thank everybody. We're also lucky to have been able to spend some time with Dr. Coleman. And can we just give her a round of applause? And we do have copies of the Black Guy Dies First for sale. And I believe Dr. Coleman is okay with doing some signing of books. So thank you all again, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
And before I turn everything off, I'm going to get the camera because strangely the light was bouncing off the screen, so I wanted to make sure people were able to at least see this screen a little bit clearer.
You want me to go back through the slides?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
Want to make sure they get your information.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
Give it about a month.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to turn this light off for 1 second.
Are you still taping?
Let's see if this. I was not pleased with that. Every little light, it kept just what you look marvelous. The screen was just like, no. Except for the clips. The clips came in.
And I'm sorry about the last two. They were supposed to be embedded, and I just used the YouTube links as a backup. So I don't know why that happened, but I will check that. Oh, that was too late.
My director's executive assistant was here, she could stay. I think I broached this with you a couple months ago when we spoke before about writing an article for the African American book list.
Oh.
So this is, she said, gave you copies of various years, past years of the African American book list. Her card is attached.
For inspiration, so I could get to work. Okay.
And to contact her, of course they pay, it's not free. I do it voluntarily. You sound like me, biologies are